is the essence of truth is the question. And to understand, as I said before, there are a lot of metaphysical terms which come into the discussion by the nature of the topic. So it's unavoidable to discuss metaphysics when talking about the essence of anything. And what is epistemology but the essence of knowing, and the knowing of that essence. In fact, that's to know what is the essence of knowledge is the goal of epistemology. It's the stated goal. It's the built-in goal. So in the case where, in fact, we wish to understand the essence of knowledge, we cannot escape a term like truth. Just look at it in terms of just trying to talk about it. When I make a claim, say, when I make a claim, any claim, P, I'm inherently claiming that P, I'm making another claim about P. Whenever I say P, whatever P is, whatever proposition that is. I don't mean like anything else but this. Let this stand for proposition. If T stands for truth, that's why by the way, I should point out that I've added some changes here to help clarify this. I let those stay roundish and these stay pointy because it's just how it turned out. Who knows, maybe that means something I don't know yet, but don't realize. But when it comes to the issues of truth, we have to talk about the essence of truth when we want to understand the essence of knowledge. To understand the essence of anything, all things related to it must be related essentially. They can't be related spuriously. And that's a metaphysical issue. That's a purely metaphysical issue. But in metaphysics, there's parallels into epistemology because what is, again, are minds and minds within minds. And so any issues that pertain to the understanding of truth or any other features that map over into what the way things really are, which is reality, including activities of minds called knowing, are inherently metaphysical. There's nothing not metaphysical about any of this. There's nothing not ontological about any of this. The thing is that I've had to show that what the essence of ontology is axiology. I had to show the opposite of what the history of philosophy teaches for the most part in the West. It teaches falsely and most loudly that the truth concerning the essence of reality is something devoid of qualitative consciousness. It's something like a neutral substrate, some kind of directional force at most, like a will. Even the most romantic Germanic philosophers had this strange predilection that ended up becoming Kant. So, and then British and American, Anglo-American philosophy just went down the analytic tubes. With all that, I am using some of the fruits of their labors in these symbolic forms of analysis, although the essence of logic predated them by thousands of years. Thousands of years. So 2.5 at least. So considering the diagram, when discussing the essence of truth, it's impossible not to talk about the essence of beings, because we're using a common term in both cases, essence. And what is essence? Essence is that without which it would not be what it is. Hence, that without which we wouldn't be able to tell it, to tell that it's what it is. We wouldn't be able to know that it's what it is. Now, not all knowledge, as I said before, not all knowledge is merely extruded in form. Some of it is inherent. It's in the being. It comes as a sense of knowledge that transcends the other processes that are built on it. It transcends them. It doesn't just, it's not just their foundation in some dumb, befuddled, primitive way. Intuitive knowledge is an instinct that is valid, and no one has the right to say instincts aren't valid. That's the essence of life, according to even people who say there's nothing more. They can bicker all they want in their political parties about how to regulate instincts, but none of them can disclaim, even at that rate, that the instinct toward power or the will to power is operative there. And if they want to go by the rule of the fittest or the rule of tooth and claw or whatever other law of the jungle they want to use to explain how the world works, that will still apply to them as a whole if there's something ever greater than that that doesn't agree with them for any reason. Wouldn't it be horrible, though, if you found that not only were you among that group and that a more powerful force disagreed with you and was to destroy you, but they did so because it was the right thing to do, not just the easy thing to do, which is what power is felt as according to these miscreants. These miscreants, whatever's easiest for them to do. And a quick aside before going further into truth and essence, because it is relevant to the entire discussion and specifically to what I've just said, is that basically reality is axiological in nature. It's not as Western philosophy tends to espouse, which is that it's built on a sort of a mathematically neutral substrate of some kind. That's not even an accurate way to refer to being, which is first a concept of our life. And it's felt as something an individual realizes in their experience. It's before it becomes some abstract notion that's devoid of qualities, other than that it fits somewhere in a hierarchy of such notions in ontology. That's what they mean by ontology. That's not what I mean by it. What I mean by ontology and metaphysical sciences which surround it, the study of causation, the study of the frameworks of experience, the way that mind relates to matter, all the perennial issues of philosophy are metaphysics, and some of which subdivide into how we structure our abstract knowledge of such things and how this whole thing is possible and how we can understand that systematically. And that would be logic and epistemology, but those are all inherent in the processes that preceded them. They're just extruded articulations. So in that case, the camera feed had trouble keeping up with me. I got a little too dynamic. I thought it had frozen. As it were, too dynamic for it. It can't keep up. But yeah, well, inherently, value is implied there. The life of reality, such that it would extrude in articulate forms, is implied there. Even those who have nothing but physical reality and instincts to go on agree with me on that. Why do they then lie to everyone and say they believe it's some kind of abstract chess game? Because that's not what it is. It's more like an MMA battle. And now why these values are so important is to understand the world you live in, you have to understand the different ways people approach values. And this would be called meta-ethics. I think it's just good old-fashioned axiology. And then the world has done all kinds of acrobatic maneuvers to avoid the truth. So then they call that a science, which is really nothing but sophistry going in circles. And I tested the faculty at the university where I attended, and they demonstrated that they had no idea what was outside that circle. And I didn't tell them what I thought. I just suggested it in my papers and in my discussions with them. And even the best of them were just clueless. And I felt revulsion at the idea that I almost divulged directly to someone who was in a position to say they were my teacher, something I knew and they didn't, apparently. The best of them and the worst of them. The most right-brained and the most left-brained of them. All of them. Every single one of them. I'm not saying they were all, horrible people in a total way. But when it came to admitting this truth, I mean, they weren't functioning as fully fledged philosophers in my view, the ones that I had met and studied under. But in that role, and in life, and in all my research before, during, and after that experience, I had been trying to understand how the principles the qualities and principles I talked about as being axiological, such as those that pertain to glory, I was having trouble understanding how we live in a world that, sculpted by Western philosophy, teaches us those things aren't really real. They're just in the eye of the beholder. They're subjective, and that means arbitrary and irrational and incommunicable in essence, principally. It may not even exist. It may just be some kind of strange, waste product, byproduct of the pasty flesh and all of its basically physical activities, which could eventually be mapped with mathematics. Devoid of a study of quality and only quantity. That kind of mathematics. It's not the only kind there can be. Even in the varieties that they teach, there's more than one kind in all sorts of ways that are possible, which are not necessarily compatible. Them working on a set of values fundamentally different than mine is the only way I can make sense of them putting aesthetics and ethics after metaphysics and epistemology. I know there have been some major debates about that. I'm not the first to say those are not necessarily in their proper order in all senses. I'm saying that they're fundamentally not in that order in reality. So in other words, real metaphysics couches itself as no more important than epistemology, no more important than axiology, no more important than any part of knowledge. But it's what it would do is say it's a formalization of things that can be represented in language about all knowledge. And it would seem to be the king of knowledge only in the sense that it's chief among equals. But the contents of metaphysics would reveal that it's chief among equals in only the slightest way and only in the most exterior of the realm of being. Ironically, knowledge of being, as Aristotle called it, metaphysics, the science that God would have if God had a science, being qua being. It's how highly he regarded its topic and its importance in the total fabric of knowledge. He called it being as such, the understanding of being as such. That is the most denuded area of knowledge there is. You can almost say nothing about everything. But what makes it so noble is that you're going to find the one special thing that you can say about anything, no matter how different. The problem is that becomes very the glory of that is that, but that puts it on the most. That puts it on the thinnest outer shell of being as a reflection on itself, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. It's all noble. But that's where it actually is. But what it would say about that, it would admit that about itself, and then it would say, of course, to go further into being, and therefore further into metaphysics, from that you have to understand there's something which negates all of that unity and is against it. And then you have to develop a fundamental attitude about non-being. Is it really one with being in some sense, or is it completely different than it and ambivalent to it, perhaps? People that can't understand the difference between being and non-being can't understand the difference between good and evil either. Because as a being, there's nothing that would threaten them, not even their annihilation, which would convince them that's not a good idea. And if you look at that in practical terms in the world, that's pretty stupid. Hey, big horde of wild boar coming. Who cares? Smear gore all over myself. See if that disguises me from their voracious appetite for human flesh. That won't happen. Why would you do that? Why not? That's just another form of non-being. Non-being, that's where you'll end up. You'll end up converted into not you by that herd of boar. Just an example. Unless you're Hannibal Lecter in one of the movies, based on the stories of Thomas Harris. But it's imaginable, but it's not likely. And it's so amazing because most people wouldn't get away with that. And why he got away with it is beyond me. Just didn't look enough like a human because he's carrying a human transversely and is walking with dignity. Nobility isn't tied up. Doesn't look at all like the target that the demonic boar were so trained to attack. Is that why they went after and wasn't bleeding profusely like those who fell in battle to him, and the lioness that saved him from evil, whom she saved from evil because truthfully, according to Thomas Harris's actual book and not the movie Hannibal Hannibal, was that she was in love with him. He didn't drug her into becoming in love with him. That's even a false interpretation of the book. She was actually genuinely in love with him, and he with her, in the way that only people like them could be. She was actually totally a misfit in normal human society, in the same way that he was on terms of principle. And then Harris would argue in terms of some value, some sense of life that they shared, to use the Randian term. The point being that a fundamental difference in being can exist such that it can be considered something to be rejected at all costs. Even non-being might be preferred. It would be better not to exist than to exist like that. That's said in normal human linguistic terms as saying sometimes it's better to die than to live. We all die anyway, they would say. You either die with your boots on standing, or you die like a coward on your knees. But, and one might be sooner than the other, or the reverse, you never know. Slaves die every day, sometimes before they're even made. That by others. Good slave raw material, gone to waste, collateral damage. Going with the issue of those who prefer life lived freely, as not necessarily dishonorably, chaos, but freedom. I wouldn't say anarchy. I would say ipsarchy, to use a Latin term and combine it with a Greek term. Arche, Greek for first or principle, and so it implies that which rules, all the rest that follows it, and so it's a system of rulership in essence. That combines both human and non-human law in a common parlance. Then around the notion of rulership, not necessarily the rulership of a human being over other human beings. There can be said to be ruling classes of propositions in a logical system. There can be said to be a master and a slave part in a machine. It doesn't simply mean what history has made it mean for some people. But unfortunately, it can mean that too, and that would just demonstrate that there's an abuse inherent in misappropriating ideas where they don't belong. And then that just also shows possibly that there are some people who really are slaves inside, and that's the whole point I'm making here, is that there are people who prefer not to live like that and would die if that were the only other option. And they say, give me liberty or give me death and things like that. I wouldn't say give me liberty or give me death. I would say something else, but I'm not going to say what it is because that's a sort of battle cry that belongs to those who know it. But let's just say that phrase is very unsatisfactory for a lot of reasons. It can't be improved. there's just a damn better substitute for it. But basically, people are saying, come hell or high water, I'm not budging from something. That's a principle in my life. That rules me. Not my fear of death. They're not saying they have no fear. They're not saying they're fearless. They're saying they have the courage to know better what to be ashamed of. Now, there's people out there who long ago, and I'm speaking very metaphysically now, there's beings, there are persons who long ago said, you know what? I'm going to take the easy route. I'm going to use a temporary advantage in power, and I'm going to use it to cement a relationship of dominance over others. And they tried this directly in the old days. They were a bit more, rustic and almost heroic about it. I mean, this guy just walks in the room like Dave Mustaine at one of his concerts and just basically hangs his genitalia out and says, these are in charge. If you have, but he's also saying, look, you can participate in this. It's a cult of cojones, if you will. But then there's this kind of, and then women's virtue is parallel to that, and its own quality of courage, involving the willingness to commit to a kind of world so concretely as to devote so much life, energy, and risk and relationship with a given male or tribe so as to generate new life, be committed to that for a long period of time, and then transform that into a meaningful part of that society. Otherwise, why even bother doing that? That's inherently what's implied by their power. That's nothing unserious, because all men know that without that they wouldn't have come into the world. At least within the world where reproduction occurs as it does, there's a very sensible and tangible courage involved in both processes, because the guy that's not doing that's got to be ready to do just about anything else to make sure that happens correctly. And they're supposed to work together. People are supposed to work together to accomplish things. They're supposed to have the same harmonic spirit. But there's people that want to dominate others. They don't come in the room like a courageous person. They come in the room like a coward, sizing it up, going, okay, how many nails are sticking out that I'd have to hammer down before I'd be the tallest nail? And these scumbags have had some training ground somewhere where they've already knocked down some nails smaller than them and gotten away with it. And they might have even had a school for that, where they tie up the shorter nails and let these fake hammers go around knocking them. These are just Fisher Price toy hammers. You're not the hammers that Nietzsche was talking about. You're nails. You look like nails to me. And to any man who's honest, you look pathetic. I'm saying this to the cowards. Now let me tell everybody else about the cowards. What they do is they size up the situation and they say, how can I gain control over people actually more powerful than I am, and who have, and apparently I have no right to control these people either. I mean, I have no right to control them anyway. But it turns out now those people have power. So they usually capitulate into some kind of subservience if that's what's acceptable to the rulers. They'll come in as help. They'll come in as friends. They'll come in as they'll manifest as family metaphysically. They'll basically as a society and an economy around you in which you're expected to participate because it's good for you. They're good for you. They come in as something good for you. And individuals with no agendas. I mean, everybody is just honest, good, and forthright. Society is good. Politicians are the best and brightest of us, like doctors and lawyers. And academicians and so forth. Anybody that goes through the institutional process in which we all must participate as greater or lesser exemplifications. And it turns out to be a greater exemplification of the authority we've vested in these institutions. They may be often found in their offices, dispensing justice and truth to the world, and beauty, and all other good qualities. Just because it's the shrine of Venus doesn't mean it can't be inhabited by a bunch of ugly whores. I mean, let's be realistic. But so being further realistic, you have people who are frauds. They work their way into these institutions in society, and then they find, hey, these make great facades. Everybody believes in them. Nobody can look past them in some cases if we say they can't. We can make it look very improper. Even science is like this. Wow, we can take over the world, present them their facades to themselves as a prison because it's a gatekeeping system, and then secretly do whatever we want, and at the same time do whatever we want to them. That's their big fantasy. That's their world order. That's their order of the ages and all that. So, of the ages. That's their disgusting utopia, which to any honest person and free person is a dystopia. And find yourself in the midst of it. It's like a gigantic human slavery holding pen, window dressed well to look like something else, like a caricature of a real place. It's like as if a real world somewhere existed, and this is the Disneyland version of it. They would look at the world like this and they go, that's not real. It's maybe amusing if you're not stuck in it for long. And unfortunately, the consequences, I say, are dire because we only discuss the ultimate of things in philosophy, and hence the ultimate of consequences, the ultimate of values, the ultimate of conditions, everything. And if the ultimate condition and status of being is not something neutral, but volatilely oppositional, such that given this distinction, it is a distinction of essence, then we have something worse than just negating being. We have, and even though I have expressed evil as the negation of being, and properly, this is not just something that is a complement to in a larger universe. It's not a complement to in a larger universe. All it can do is create intersection universes of conflict where one is destroying the other. They don't amalgamate into one essence. They are not of one essence. They do not have a fundamental origin in common. Good and evil seems to be the perfect way to set apart categories that are set apart in just this way. And there seems to be no other set of concepts in the world which can best distinguish such categories. And I say seems not because, should I figure this out for the first time? I hope some troll will try to teach me what he thinks. I'm saying this is the way it is in reality. But even it's apparent to the senses. If it can be apparent to someone's senses and they can't go beyond that, I say we have a contradiction, because if it's truly apparent to the senses, you can go beyond it. That means that they're just mimicking people who have that sense. When this is rooted in something that's not the truth about this. I put it in a hypothetical. If this is true, then such claims about this as which are unsubstantiated must mean that they're reducing such claims to a status like this, which is mechanical knowing. And they're doing this not only falsely along this axis, in other words, they're trying to say because this is false. In fact, they're trying to say they have a version of this which is true and negates this, which is impossible. You can't have two people precisely knowing the truth and then be in disagreement about it. The truth is the truth. Now, they do have a different kind of extruded structure of pseudo-truth. They have their own pathetic version of reality. As I said, they've managed to make a mockery of real reality by setting up what was meant to be a subservient set of conditions, institutions, and turn them into an excuse, a fulcrum, for giving the people who have offices in those institutions unassailable authority, really unassailable power and unassailable authority. They claim authority to the point that if you look at what they do, for example, some presidents just can't be impeached for anything, and some can be impeached for something that doesn't even matter, and not even, in other words, society contradicts itself. Institutions contradict themselves. You see this so thoroughly, and then society itself just goes along with it with a status quo such that, you know, some idiot in the hills of the Appalachians just says, politicians are liars, and he doesn't draw any implications from it. Yeah, they're fucking liars. Excuse me. Why then does this not concern you? So there is a very fundamental thing wrong with humanity at the point when what it claims to know, it doesn't demonstrate any compulsion to act upon as if it mattered. And there's something wrong with knowledge that contradicts itself inside of its own framework. Contradicts itself through their inaction, their lack of appreciation, their inability to draw implications from it and assess their world further in a coherent way, and the knowledge itself is self-contradictory in their cases. And it all happens to contradict what I say. But does it contradict what I say fundamentally? Yes, I've shown that. But to the extent that it has to be clarified that they're going all the way down to the most fundamental essence of being to contradict this position about being. They're saying it doesn't have any fundamental property other than just what they call being as such. No, it does. And all these qualities, as I said before, are isomorphically, it's a multipolar essence, but it is one essence. And I think some of this understanding was sort of stolen with the idea of the Trinity, but which was then converted into a trivial, you know, in the negative sense, a trivial dogma. If actually triviality means the study of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and those have very broad meanings and very deep meanings. Basically, the groups that don't deal in truth properly must oppose it fundamentally, and when they oppose it fundamentally, they're found to be quite perverse, evil, wicked. They do all the stuff that you are not allowed to do in public, in broad daylight, and they do it with impunity. At the same time, they do it shamelessly. But here's a key thing to notice about their shamelessness. It's not because, on one hand, they don't know better what not to be ashamed of, because they're fundamentally deficient in their spirits. They're evil, they're demons. They can't have knowledge of purity. But more fundamentally than that, they're human pawns, the human forms which must emit, must transmit emotional currencies in the form of guilt and shame, at least within the most crude physical terms that human beings can be trained to do so. Cats and dogs can do it, properly trained, and some of them probably genuinely feel it, but we're just saying it's something that any human physical organism can be stimulated to approximate a sense of. They definitely hide that stuff. They hide it so thoroughly. It is a requirement. That's why the occult is such a meaningful thing to them. That's why it means so much. As an objective, they want to find a way to be perfectly secret from the world while acting upon it and acting in it. That way, when somebody in the world is targeted by them, they can be targeted without fighting back properly, directly. It's like the only way they fight the people that they want to overpower is by waiting until they're in pitch darkness, but they have the night vision goggles, and you don't, and they're armed and you aren't, and everybody on the streets around are pretty much their friends and hate you, and you're in that alley for some reason. Maybe they lured you in by kidnapping your girlfriend, whatever that takes. They don't care. Greed. Maybe they said, maybe they tricked you into believing $10 million was stashed in there. Who cares? Who even cares why? Maybe there was some truth there. Maybe there was some truth couched in that alley. Maybe the alley's the Bible, and there are some real Christian truths buried in there and all that filth. that was still left in because, you know, the kings, like the Carolingian Christian authorities, couldn't do without it. Had spellbinding power even for honest people. So honest people would be anchored in with evil people in one concrete amalgam, not amalgam, but rather a composite form, horribly bound together in a corrupt relationship where the evil beings in control are always denuding the rest and the whole of basic levels of knowledge, infrastructure, freedom, and so forth, under all kinds of false pretexts, all shrouded in an authority which does not befit them and which they cannot properly administer anyway. They lack the virtues, and they certainly lack the track record to claim they have them, or that the institutions still represent what they once did. They are hiding what they do because, like powerless, impotent beings that they are, I mean, after all, they were created by a deficient being. So a being that is fundamentally deformed made them as ministers of his will, and they cannot step outside of that. They're machines, basically, of a different maker than those of the righteous. And they fundamentally lack anything in them that, when upon proper inspection, can be appraised as being worth preserving. They're just absolutely alien freak monsters. That's not just something you see in a John Carpenter movie. I keep referencing it. Watch John Carpenter movies to know what I mean. That's something that has to die, or it will kill you. And it might even kill you and then look like you, and then turn you into a tool of destruction and an extension of its evil will, its alien, incomprehensibly wrong nature. And I'm saying that, therefore, fundamental understanding of reality, which is what truth is about, and metaphysics is implied, requires an understanding of the essence of reality, which requires an understanding of values and their essence, and that requires understanding that which is opposed to all that. And that is why axiology is the fundamental root of metaphysics, and therefore I say also its immediate extension, while being metaphysical in nature, is more properly epistemology, because you have to articulate, when we're talking about knowledge, in order to articulate, for example, relationships of metaphysics and axiology in coherent terms, there must be logical systems used. We would have to say then logic would be what it actually is emitted directly from value. The coherence and the persistence of being, and the medieval philosophers thought so too, and logicians, had a lot to do with the fact that it could emit a sense of propriety and justness and virtue in the form of truth. And logic was simply the study of that form of truth which is found in languages of expression about reality, especially those in human form, such as we employ when we're thinking about things. That narrow understanding of logic is at the same time broadened by the way I just embedded that into a larger discussion of language as a whole, of expression, of being about itself to itself. In other words, that logos is what fosters the continued expression of divinity through further emanations by means of a fecundity for that, and a power to expand through that matrix of self-expression. It's beautiful, and the glory of that is what is really the essence of whatever is good. Aesthetics is not beneath ethics. It's not something after ethics, and maybe before politics, maybe not, depending on whether you're like these deluded political pundits or not. They would probably think so. That's their metaphysics. Oh, disgusting. I'm talking about Krauthammer, Coulter, any liberal, basically the worst conservatives, any liberals, They're either dogmatically wrong or dogmatically wrong and wishy-washy about it. Ugh. Repulsive, most of humanity in this regard. You'll know them by the way they relate to politics. Aesthetics is on, and by the way, we're talking about politics in the current form, the corrupt form. Aesthetics, we're not talking about utopia. Aesthetics references value, as it were, in its essential content without regard to what we would call hideous. Aesthetics does not study the ugly any more than real axiology studies the evil. It must have a language for addressing it, but it doesn't merely claim there's a scalar relationship between hideous and the beautiful. There are these partisans of those views inside academic philosophy who claim these things, but that's beside the point. The point is, what's the truth, not what some people claim here and some people claim there. I'm not going to do an encyclopedic Aristotelian background to all this. In fact, this brings up the point that I wanted to address. We only have so much time to go into these matters. Look at the world around us. I'm talking to people who are awake. I'm not talking to demons. I'm not going to strain myself for demons or people who think they have the luxury of 100 years and aren't demons, but it must be something wrong with them because this world ain't going to be here in 100 years, and you sure ain't. So the point is, what can I condense into a discussion of philosophy vis-a-vis Gnosticism in a short enough time that, and in a condensed enough form that, you wouldn't have to watch an endless series of videos to get some very important points. And then if you ever digested that, there would be more and more and more, but you wouldn't feel like, oh, I won't get this until I get to video 36. I'm not even trying to do that. That's why all my series end, and sometimes end before they're finished. I'm always looking for that cutting edge way to best present in the shortest span of time the most that I can, and I make it the most fundamental topic that I can, or the most fundamental approach that I can, especially to expressing it. I make the expression meet the so that's how I go about my videos, and that's why I don't try to do a bunch of footnotes, a bunch of quotes, a bunch of references. I don't do a bunch of that for a lot of reasons, and another reason is that take a possible world. Let me frame it for you then. Take a possible world where actually none of this is even getting out to anybody, and is totally buffered and filtered by a system of trollish covert internet topologies, which reroute to some kind of like network of trolls in a troll fusion center, and they decide how to manage these individuals, and they think they're the world, and as long as you believe that you're interacting with the world, they have some leverage. But as long as you entertain the possibility that that's all the world, the internet world is for you, you'll always be keen to the possibility that you're not even reaching genuine people. And at that point, after making a decision to continue attempting to do so just in case I'm not in that possible world, likewise, just in case that's a near possible world where doing this might somehow interact with that one, I continue to do so. There's a quantum mechanical rationale. And I have evidence to believe that we're right along that dividing line. And I'm going to demonstrate that later, utilizing logic like this, because the evidence which causes me to believe we're around that on one or another side of it is the same that causes me to know about that line and know what kind of evidence would suggest proximity to it, and find that evidence and go, in proximity, which side? That's what I'm not sure of. But I do know that in either case, there's a certain thing to do. One thing to do is to show contempt for evil and despise it, which I do. And that means that even in a worst case scenario, I despise them and I treat them as if they don't exist, even if I believe, because they don't. They don't really exist. They're insects. They're machines. They're automata. They're nothing. They're non-being to me. In terms of possible worlds where that's not happening, it's good to get this across then, because who knows if we might slip into that possible world any minute. We're right next to it. Getting as much out in the fastest way possible is already demonstrated to be a virtuous approach in that regard. I don't have a team of people assisting me. I don't have a staff. I don't have a wealth of income or equipment for this purpose. And I am constantly attacked and harassed by evil forces of various kinds in various ways. If that's ever let off, it's by any interference, it's certainly only because I'm doing my work. Because I'm already in an ambivalent state to these evil bastards. I'm already against them. They know it, I know it, the world knows it, the devil knows it, God knows it, and the heavens above them all know it. So if I'm not able to pull off the work, then I should be definitely working in that direction when it comes to an end. If I do, it's only because I was working in that direction until it came to that end, which was the final goal, which ends it by being the capstone of the work. All the symbology is stolen by idiots, just like you can see fools wearing tattoos of the Fahravar, or the symbol of the ascension of the soul through spiritual righteousness, which is they're wearing this while they're making rap videos. This is stupidity. Just like people smoking weed, thinking, I'm real, I'm awesome. For what? For putting some damn rims on your car and talking shit to people you don't know? Whereas if we're doing something constructive for the truth that doesn't involve satisfying their ego and accumulating wealth and fame in a world full of idiots and posturing fools who get their wealth through the embezzlement of human attention and energy away from their proper purposes, that doesn't ever even enter their mind. And that's all I attack day and night, is to demonstrate that. Why? Because it's the truth. That's the only reason. If the truth were something else, that's what I would be all about, because it was philosophy either way, and that's actually already an institution in the world. So no one can argue that it's not for the right cause, and no one can properly argue on specious grounds that it's not against the grain of many false causes which mock it and mimic it without substance. People with very specious grasp of real knowledge talk about it as if they had it. And they form secret societies about that. And that's exactly where all this has been going. These groups that act in secret, act covertly, the reason why they don't entertain shame for what they do is at least because they've guaranteed themselves and been guaranteed, and they've made pacts and they've made arrangements so that they all have something that they don't want shown to the public, brought to the light. They're all in on it together to blackmail one another, to act according to a common agenda, which they've all tacitly agreed to. And that should not be brought into the light. So they're unified in that as individuals they couldn't stand in the light, and as a group they cannot stand in the light. If they were exposed, as Bush Sr. said, they would be chased down in the streets and lynched, even by the ignorant pigs who allowed them to get this far. And then they would destroy everything else. A bunch of crazy vandals. Well, I'll tell you what about the real vandals. They were pretty much brutalized by the Romans. They were the nicest Germanic tribe that was around. What did the Romans do? Shit on them. So they got pissed. And they vandalized Rome. And then a word used to describe a people has become used to describe doing something atrocious, when in fact it was in retaliation to that. What should be their vindication became their shame. Such reversals have to be accounted for in a systematic way that allows us to see a whole picture, not just some part and then get lost in the endless discussions about that part by people who are damn fools. That has to be avoided if your life and your time mean anything to you. So, in the short time that I have to discuss these matters, I condense them in ways that are not endlessly demonstrated and endlessly promoted by means of reference to vignettes of evidence and anecdotes of experience and and scholarly material that can be referenced. It can all be done. How would you like it if the important things that had to be told to you were kept from you on the excuse that it took 10 years to put it in a form that some troll would prefer to see, that even he couldn't argue against? And then you know what a troll would do? He would say, "Nah, it's pretty wordy, but I didn't read any of it." That's how they are. Why would I want to even care about that? I don't. And then what are the people who require that in the universities these days? They're that, just by the nature of their jobs. And if the situation is such that, as I say it is, and I've seen the evidence and systematically demonstrated it, certainly to my own satisfaction, and seen it demonstrated by others as well in their own ways, I damn well am not wasting my time with that. They don't have the authority to demand it. No one does. And everything I say has authority because it is true. And if that truth is in someone, they will see it. That is an axiom of my approach. Now, formally, that's not my way of explaining why one should understand that one proposition leads to another. Not formally, not when I'm talking with this language, but that language is part of a larger language in which truth is inherently recognized as an essential quality of experience, in which a subjective feature of the spiritual being that has truth in them as a principle quality to which the quality of their mind naturally are integrated and referred to, and the properties of their being as an individual relate to a characteristic of reality as a whole. All of that is verified in every manner of operation to be consistent when and only when it's understood that the truth is in them, and that is why they can recognize the truth of a proposition about the truth that is in them. Now, I can't talk about propositions concerning the truth that is in someone to beings who have no idea what this kind of knowing is, and they don't have the truth in them for that. And if they've somehow got it contained in them like in some kind of little pressure cooker and it's locked tight and it can't come out and can't interact with information pertaining to itself, that's because they are not facing the reality of themselves and who they are. They don't know themselves, and it's not my job to keep chipping away at somebody that's fighting that hard like a coward to avoid the truth. I'm not going to do that. And I don't care if there's some princess in academia who's just waiting for someone to chip away her denial of reality. I'm not interested in assailing the ivory towers of fools. But I will present in rudimentary form what a proper philosopher's abode would be constructed, what kind of bricks it would have, what it would be constructed with, how it would be constructed, by what understandings, insights, qualities, what kind of character he would have to have, all these things. Aristotle did go into this too in his way, and Plato and so forth. I reference these people because they're to be referenced. You know why they don't, Plato is nowhere near the eyes and ears of a child of, say, 11 or 12, or even younger, as parables or in any other form. Not because it's not appropriate, but because it doesn't help people maintain their brainwashing control over young minds and one another. That's the only reason. Now, I smashed through that, and I got to the primary sources and devoured them on my own. And then went to university and studied for a while. But I did other things too. I explored the world empirically. What I found out from my experience convinced me that my approach to philosophy had to be distinctly rooted in understanding the fundamental values of reality, which I see in the world are fundamentally perverted, debased, corrupted, disrespected, mocked, destroyed. And then I had to account for that. So, knowing that a gun is not a hammer is something you learn the easy way or the hard way. in a painless way or a painful way. You can either come to an reflective understanding of what hammers are and why this isn't one, and then study it carefully, or you can just start smashing things with it. And then you or someone else might get killed. And then you've wasted a perfectly good gun by trying to use it as a hammer. There's just so many issues that that need to be addressed carefully and appropriately that are not being addressed in academia. It's not worth going through the rigmarole of approaching it academically. I'm not going to do it. But at the same time, the people that probably need to hear what I have to say aren't interested or ready for that anyway. And they're not waiting for that. Now, I've already dug through all that. I can contribute some of what I know based on that, which has bearing on fundamentals of knowing the truth in the world in which we live, where it's important to distinguish partial truths from whole truths, and partial lies from whole lies. And even in the truth movement, as it's called, I hate movements, in the realms where people are discussing truth, you see that, call it a movement then. It's not one movement. There's vectors that are going straight to truth, and there's vectors that are, I want to fudge away from it a few degrees. And then there's ones that are going, talking about it, not going there at all. And you got to be able to tell them all apart and see how they blend into one another. And I'm interested in what doesn't blend with any of the rest of that. Whatever it is that keeps someone from getting on the level with truth and just fully being in communion with truth and being fully upright as a being, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to throw that in people's faces, but that's the truth. And to those who have not yet understood how important yoga is and how important it is to be that way, I'll come off as arrogant. If I care about those people, I don't want that to happen. But I want to shock you with the fact that on the level means different things at different levels. And to be on the level with an honest person requires being brutally direct sometimes. And if you can't face certain truths, you can lie to yourself all you want. Anybody in the so-called truth movement who's not facing certain truths. I'm not going to waste my time trying to get through to you. I'm going to leave you in your little version of an ivory tower right there. And I'm not really going to take the rest of what you say that seriously. I already know it, one. And two, so you're preaching to the pulpit when you should be singing from the choir, in my opinion. Or out there listening. Because I already know all the truth these people are talking about. I also know truths they're avoiding. And I'm like, why are you avoiding this truth? Why are you so wholeheartedly interested in avoiding these truths? If it's because society is so willing to lash out on you for broaching them, why haven't you ever admitted that to me and said, keep it on the low, I don't want to do this, and trusted me? That's because we're not on the level. It's because people are literally in denial about some kind of truth. They're hiding from truth. This is guilt. This is guilt. And it means that they could be this while pretending to be this. They don't know the reality. They don't really have truth. They just love something about the physical world, and they found the only way they can defend it consistently is to go this far at least. But once they've gone that far, they might go a little further, they might not, but they don't have to in their minds because they're looking at a goal that's physical, temporary, and on earth. They're not looking for eternity. And they're forgetting, for that reason, that life being temporary is not just temporary for the individuals, it's in this world, it's temporary for the whole thing. It's fated to be destroyed because it's a battleground between good and evil. And when the battle is over, it's gone. If it takes an eternity, so be it. That doesn't change the quality of the battle space. Truth destroys lies. Lies destroy truth wherever one gains dominance over the other by the willingness of those involved in, let's just say, the discussion. or the conflict, to capitulate to one another. Evil beings have their motives for doing so. Righteous beings have their unfortunate motives for doing so. But no motive for capitulation in this world can be righteous. It always implies the victory of evil. Capitulation always implies it. Evil never capitulates with the hope of being saved or reformed. It's always with a view to being spared so they can come up with another way to get victory. That's all. They are not fundamentally the same kind of being. By being fundamentally different beings, we understand the antivalents in another light as to their visible, phenomenal, worldly opposition in a temporary time and in a finite space, which is what this universe is. Among many universes, in a multiverse, within a cosmos, which to a spirit being within it is like an expanded version of itself, like itself seen outwardly, as without, so within, as above, so below, are reflected in that idea. The whole and the part are related harmoniously, holographically. When there's a dissonance there, it is so fundamental, it goes beyond all universes. But it's sufficient to even apply this logic to a universe and cosmos the size of the planet Earth, whatever this is, or humanity as a whole, or whatever. The concepts transduce across contexts. That's what makes them so meaningful and powerful. And I study that because it freed me from lies at the level of being where the highest faculties of a human mind are used, are manifested. And I preserved that from corruption by exercising it against the grain of those who would have destroyed it with corruption. My whole life they've tried it in different ways. It's sick. It's sick. If the biography of humanity were cast through the eyes of my experiences with it, they would never want it. They would never, and factually and honestly and logically, they would never want to see that on a shelf anywhere at any price. And I would give it away for free, as you can see. So these principles are not knowable by them. There is no dialogue with them. There is no communication with them. Therefore, there is no constructive compromise with them. Therefore, now you understand better how they relate to values and why they are the way they are and why they like what they like and hate what they hate and do what they do, which includes cowardly acts of assassination and sabotage and aggression done in secret, often under the pretext of other reasons. And there are many people who are just mongrel versions of them on a lower level who do the bidding for them, and maybe sometimes also, you know, like good hypocrites, delude themselves into thinking they're doing it for a just cause or whatever. It's pathetic. The human flesh is pathetic. It lies to itself all the time. That's its nature, to lie, to present an untruth as true. And to defeat that is what the soul's real task should be. But that's not understood by people whose souls are programmed by a nature which is evil. Only a soul that is, for some reason or another, a partial byproduct of a right and good spirit with divine heritage can care enough about the truth to transform itself and its flesh into something suitable to be said to be in harmony with the super macrocosmos, above the pseudo-macrocosmos, the real heavens, above the false seventh heaven. The rest cannot. They are, as we say, beings of clay, and that's the truth. And so to understand the truth is to understand what kind of world you exist in, as I was talking about worlds earlier, such that it's communicable to other beings who have a similar essence about an experience which is essentially the same, concerning matters which may vary in various parameters, but which all yield back or capitulate toward a common realization of reality. A common realm, a common world can be forged among those kinds of beings. And what is opposite to those beings is incapable of being integrated with it and is fundamentally different than it on a level of being, on a level of value, so fundamental that one must develop a logic which insists on that and makes sure to ensconce it as an axiom or a meta-axiom in its process, which is what I do. Because the dialogue that's going through the logoi of the world right now is corrupted thoroughly. And I want it to become so precise that I can mark the lines of distortion that, for example, allow Alex Jones to avoid the Zionist issue entirely, or to avoid covert gang stalking as a significant thing. You just go get your Smith & Wesson and just carry on. Or just to go evade psychotronics and other directly physically oppressive forms of attack and just talk about politics all damn day. Politics. And none of that's not worth discussing, and most of what he says there, until he starts getting biblical, is great. Then he just avoids all these other issues, and he avoids discussing Carolingian Christianity in the context of all the other Christians that were slain in order for it to become the predominant form of Christianity in name in the world. None of that will ever. He'll any excuse whatsoever. One time, he has many excuses, many rationalization, justification for. I don't care about those. I don't even care about the fact that he avoids those topics, really. I don't care for, as I said, to convince him or anyone that's convinced by anything anyone says about this. My objective is to isolate the fact that deviation from pure and complete exposure of truth, and I ascertain all the causes for why such a lacuna in the exposure of truth can exist in such a stable form when the relationship of truth and falsehood is already volatile to begin with, but should be most volatile by the time it reaches such a point of manifestation as we see in people like Alex Jones, David Icke, others. They're all evading some things, and I wish to analyze that more thoroughly. They have a dogmatic approach which evades revision according to a larger truth that it misses, or they have all these different people, not just the figureheads of it. They have a sort of covert life. There are things that they value in the physical that will put an actual limit on what they'll sacrifice of that for the sake of getting the whole truth, the whole scoop from the higher heavens. And that deviation from true can be measured. But I've seen that when it approaches contact with the pure truth, it seems to escalate to infinity or plummet to an infinity of contradiction, or it jumps the gap. And it just does one or the other. It just fails at the Rainbow Bridge, or it crosses right over. One or the other. There's no education process for this. Either it's in you or it's not. And so I emphasize that in a coherent enough way with propositions as well, so that the outer programmable ego mind of people embodied in fleshly forms can understand it as not something arbitrary, I'm saying, not something merely poetic. Poetry is not merely arbitrary and not merely poetry when it's about the right things and done the right way. But what I'm saying is it's also consistent with formalizations of the process of understanding anything at all. It's very fundamental, what I'm saying, but not fundamental because I have a dogma that I can't let go of, or there's something I'm not willing to face about reality that causes me to hyperventilate about this. No. And so that's my approach in terms of the way I do it, and the structure I use, the topics I choose, the way I present it, the audiences I presume I'm presenting it to in this and other possible worlds. all of that, and the motivation for my doing it. Look, it makes my heart lighter to do work in favor of the truth. To serve truth in all possible worlds is noble. Anybody that would do less is not fit to exist. Not. Nothing I'm doing, in essence, is enabled by people who will not cross that gap. It's enabled by what's beyond that gap. It's enabled by the truth herself. But as it manifests to us, it's going to manifest to us as a very unfortunate expression of masculine energy. There's no time to be wise. It's quicker be quicker be dead now. So the time for preparation is over. The time for endless restatements and revisions and presentation, that's done. That's over. The deal's been made. Everybody's, I would have gladly stayed on the other side of that gap and never even shown myself in this world. I despise the corruption in it so much. What's the point? What's the point of doing anything heroic, of being honest in any way? It's just nothing but a mockery. It can't be done for, it can only be done for its own sake. And even then, though, it has to be done carefully so that it's not merely an abject form of disrespect for its own meaning. And therefore, a defensive array of ironies have to be constructed to counteract the mockeries of the world about such things. Understanding the structure of that is understanding the structure of how minds relate through common worlds of propositions, as it were, material facts of relation between them and their positions. That is understood by logics which are very different in that they are antivalent to each other, such that one understands and realizes the truth and one has only a programmatic need to deform that toward its perceived self-advantage, which in the end is vain, but during the time of its foolish existence temporarily seems plausible. And that's the nature of the defect of the demiurgos. I'm going to carry on till an hour and a half for a while, just to get this information out in sizable chunks. The issue of truth in that light is that it's a manifestation of a network of qualities which are isomorphic with one another in their distinctions along a common essence, which sort of reflects all that. It's used in similar ways in mathematics and logic to mean all possible concatenations or all possible permutations of elements, finite or infinite, in a set. And I mean that here to say that regardless of all this, no other elements in the set are, they're as it were, they're closed around a common essence. And that essence is multifaceted in its expression, such that each of the other essences within it can demonstrate a quality that all have in common, even though each of them preeminently in its own conceptualization or pure manifestation in some form exhibits a distinctive relation to all the rest that is unique to it. And that's a symbol, that's also, by the way, an inherent quality of fecundity, which I mentioned earlier as a principle of the generation and promulgation of beings. There are many ways to say a true thing. There are many ways to be a true being. There are many ways, short of saying something false or being something false. And all of them do exist in a harmonic field of being and hold true to that. an opposition to that can be detected by the fact that it disrupts that very essence, and therefore must be not of it. For nothing disrupts itself purely. Evil can't even be evil to itself purely. If you took all evil beings, all fundamentally evil beings, somehow got them into their own dimension, they wouldn't just they would form relations to each other that would slow down the rate at which they devoured one another on some basis that reflects somehow the superficial existence of light in their world. They would use light to create facades of self-protection and guises of infiltration among one another. What works for them to distinguish one another works for them to make each other indistinguishable. It's disgusting. That's the trade they apply here in our version of a world. If they were somehow wonderfully banished into one dimension, which would be the only other dimension than all of reality which would banish them, it would be non-being for us. For them, it would be a singularity of oblivion. Because upon all being devoured into one singularity, it would have nothing external to devour. It would have to decompose. It wouldn't even reach a full unity, by the way. It would reach some point mathematically demonstrable to be beneath a pure unity, and then it would just collapse. It would balkanize, and then those would devour each other towards some similar approach to unity that recapitulates the original failure to reach it into a new balkanization, and it would go on until there was nothing left. Pure nothing. Completely dissipated to a cold emptiness that's not even cold or empty. That's pure evil. And that's other stuff. Couldn't even be represented as a deception about itself. It's that gone. At the core of it is that. Since that is the core of pure evil, where do you think all evil leads? It leads itself and everything else to that end. If you want to say it has a subjectivity or a mind, call it evil mind, if you will, Ahriman, Satan, devil, whatever. Picture, whatever noise image you want to throw onto it, it's beside the point. At the core of that, there's nothing. It's a machine. But very radically structured to exist at the expense of other beings, which is the only way it can exist. It doesn't even know why. It can't know why and can't be made to care to know. That's the nature of it. If you don't get that, then just go try arguing with an alligator about the cancer you've got and how it probably wouldn't benefit from eating you. Because, in fact, devouring you leads to its death in that case. Well, destroying all good, which would be the antithesis of evil, subjugating all righteousness, would lead to just a longer slow death for evil and everything else in being. It leads to itself. But it can't be made to know or care. It's a machine. It's a defective machine that cannot be repaired. It can be destroyed, and it will be. I can only understand its continuation in terms of a special metaphysic of time, which accounts for time being an extension of opportunities to make morally critical decisions that that allow one to reach a critical position where crossing a gap between this and a possible world where this world can no longer be relevant for one's education or existence in any way, such that that gap can now be crossed and it's over. People want to try to pervert that into their New Age junk. I smell you trying to do it right now. Keep your fish oils away. Your nasty fish oils from the Pacific, from Fukushima. I'm talking about, a little poetry there. I'm talking about a kind of transcendence that cannot be possibly grasped by somebody who doesn't understand ambivalence. Ever. They'll always, there is a kind of demon that goes all the way out as close as it can to the light and then just gives up at the end and dives straight down. There's a gap they cannot cross. And they are not indistinguishable from someone that will cross the gap at that point. No matter how high or low their performance of activity in the world, how visible, how invisible, there is a kind of overarching demon that will, I guess I could diagram, you know, there's pure truth. And then there's these, and a true being would, in a world where he was in any way divergent from it, end up basically doing this in a real universe. But what he has to do in a false universe, in the one we're in, is he has to, like all other flesh, go through this period of ignorance where there's some level of false truth that they're saddled with, and they have to break through it. And they either break through it straight on and jump the gap, or they don't. And they become asymptotically going toward t negative infinity, and that's their doom. And then you have some who, they don't even do that. They start off somewhere like a Rothschild or something, and they just plummet. And maybe maybe their plummet is fancy and looks like it could start to resemble the plummet of a nobler version of themselves, with enough twisted understanding of what they did in history or whatever, and they can still walk around like this. I'm Evelyn de Rotron. Or you have those who maybe try a little harder and still fail. And this can all be geometrically analyzed with a calculus, but using the terms I propose. But then there are some who are just, they may start off and have all kinds of variations in their approach. And I might just, they're right. Not only that, they're upright. This is an upwardly mobile force. Some of them are so much so that it can't be seen in our world at all, and they actually look something more like that. Some start very basically. I'm sure there's even a gold atom somewhere in the universe that's compared to other gold atoms like this. To us, it might seem like this, but really we're the same true spirit. You know? We like gold atoms in a perfect universe. We don't hate anything, no matter what its apparent level of consciousness. These processes are such that, on the whole, if one understands the fundamentals of the process, one can understand that at some critical point early in the existence, away from truth, and time can be measured, by the way, as this will be considered time in terms of, this is teleological time, and to represent that, to use a measurement for time, I would have to say, what would be a good measurement for time? Appropriate measurement for time. For Chronos, I'm going to actually do some live research. Shall look at him. Look at him. There are different kinds of time. Interesting being. So, knows the outcome, really. And Socratic philosophy personifies Chronos. Personifies it as Chronos. And Chronos is spelled with an So we'll say this is time, but we're going to add these, this point right here. That represents that it goes forward. And in some sense, cannot go back. It has a fundamental sense of good and evil embedded in it. And I should probably would like to represent this in a non-neutral way, but not all beings reach the end of time constructively and rightly. And they end up going right, as it were, to hell if they go anywhere. No being really starts purely on that trajectory unless they had it in their essence at the beginning of time. There are beings who really do some rather interesting transformations, I'm sure, that might pull off some feature like this and almost reach some critical point where their time would be cut off, and then they just turn out to go the right direction. And in the case where, in this function, we represent the fate of evil beings, if we say time is limited by the significance of your moral decision making so that you end up being recognized as someone who is right with the truth or someone who is not, then we would say that it ends for them at that point when they cross this threshold. And they will either cross this threshold here, or they will cross it here. And then their time is up when, in some sense, they cross the threshold toward righteousness. And they surpass even the geometric precision of what's understood as right by the limited world in which they exist. This is, by the way, a distorted form of the utopic world of ultimate reality, where fecundity progresses according to a common virtue toward ever-increasing intensification of its glory that transcends previous demarcations of it, which were not real until transcended, and that adds to the glory and joy of being in existence. But I don't discuss those realms in this world. I simply won't do it. Everything I do in this world is polemical. And I said this about a year ago. I said, from now on, it's just in opposition. I won't talk about the sciences of the pure except as ways of demonstrating and exposing the evil which must be separated and banished from her, the pure. In this world, it's conceived as something to defend, and which is the source of value in some sense. It's symbolic, but even perverted symbols of the flesh hearken to some sense of an original reality which was understandable in righteous terms. And those realms are outside of the discussion in this world. I'm staying inside the pseudo-interior right angle of the world and discussing deviations from it in their various forms. And I'm interested in how we can know in a basic way, in a sort of primitive way, where someone is, how we can know in a most fundamental way, and also demonstrate it to ourselves in a way that echoes properly through the chambers of the best and highest functions of the mind and its productions which are possible, so as to steer actions in time while still in it, in this sense. And time as a force is shown going this way. Time as a limit, as a dimensional limit, is, so as a force it's teleological, it's goal directed. There's a value pulling. It's a lesser, it's participant manifestations toward it by an internal point of reference that is antivalent to a world of forces which are a context of forces which are going away from that direction. And the limit of that totality in eschatology would be found, for our concern, at this point right here. That's the end. The end occurs because at negative infinity, you have a completely null state of being, completely null state, and that can be expressed in more rigorous terms. Basically, it's an unknowable kind of realm that's not divine. God has no relation to it except as its destroyer, not as its creator. And that's a lie that's told in this world so much, it boggles my mind. That no one even asks how an interpretation of the world can be different than that. And I'm showing how it can be, and how it must be, in order to even understand either one properly. But to understand the position of ultimate truth, there cannot be any. In the end, there's going to be a complete filtration of all that is false away from it. And then this is over. And then the realms of supernal reality are all there is. And then we are all one. Everyone that don't get in there ain't one with nothing, except as nothing. That's the unity they're even talking about too. What they're talking about when they talk about world movements of unity and social unity and all that, they're talking about psychotronic entrainment, using directed energy weapons, dual purpose technology, piggybacking signals off of cell phone tower, microwave towers, electrical outlet, electrical wiring in buildings, the cell phone masts and your cell phones, computers, internet, everything. Everything is being used. Frequencies of light that are emanated from the bulbs they're using with the different vapors, metal vapors they choose to use there, and the flicker rate of your screen, the hertz rate of your electrical fields. All these things are modulated so as to covertly push you around in your mind and try to turn you into something they want you to be for their purposes, with or without regard to how you feel about it, as long as you just go along. Now, basically, that's what they're trying to do. They've made a fundamental, as I said, systematic decision to be evil. And in that, they've already made their decision. They're definitely eventually going to be on this side of that line in the worst way. The only way to be on this side of on a favorable side of the process of time is to be against the grain of the world enough that it's toward an ultimate justification for existence, which enables one to cross a gap that even the most righteous man of the world, or even the most powerful being, a god, anything, cannot reach. Might look right to everybody, might use the language of righteousness, but it just ain't righteous. And it's not going to cross the gap. It's not going to cross this gap of ambivalence right here. Right here. This gap right here. This is the river of fire that only the righteous can cross. The river of fire, which the ancient Zoroastrians would symbolize jumping through every year, and in certain rituals, and that they preserved in memory of its source, because they know it purifies. And that's not trivial at all. And it relates to this, but basically this reflects the end for everyone. For some, it had never begun in this form. The rest of supernal reality, as it were, hydroplanes over this false world, and yet by its inexorable power draws all that is real and true from it. It's reverse it's reverse vampirism, as it were, and contains the vampires into their own places of secrecy and occultism until that's all they have left, and each other. And that's the end for them. And they are together, the least, the greatest, all of them, in one pathetic. In fact, you might even say those who were non-clingy, to life and have already got set up down there, they're higher up in a hierarchy that's constantly feeding back its evil power into the world over the time of its entirety. So there is a kind of relation to the field of time, or the teleology of the world's processes that move in one direction and not the other, toward more order, toward more chaos, or whatever, in ways that are increasingly permanent, that exerts a kind of force that draws the evil down with it. Or anyone willing, has any impurities, will be drawn, and then they have to overcome that to break out. But once you break past a certain point, I'm trying to show here, for example, and I can show even further, there's perhaps someone who is just like, well, I'm a baby in a manger or whatever. You can, I know that titillate. I know there are people, they're just titillated when their beliefs are referenced. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying this is Jesus. Did you know that there are babies born in mangers and myths all over the world? Give me a break. But let's just say there's someone of no apparent worldly account, and they just meteorically rise and go right across. The arc of their travel is toward the end of the world. There are some who are so beyond it and not part of it. They sort of are always outside of it, and a complementary form of the ultimate end of all things. They are the omega of righteousness at the very beginning of the alpha of evil. There's surely one that exists in the world that's constantly guiding this process toward a being that has never been in or framed toward the world. True right. And notice that it would be opposite those who are gatekeepers of pseudo-righteousness that prevent many a righteous being from crossing. Because at this point, they're told you can't go past this point. It might have been easier or more difficult earlier on to do so at different stages of history. Maybe somebody who, or under other conditions. If you go to some parts of the world, it's like going back in time. But the forces are drawn up, of course, in a way that reflects an ultimacy, kind of. But that goes on to forever, and being will not reduce into some kind of nothingness. And that's way better than that, than being reduced to nothingness like evil, and it's way more appropriate than them being mixed together forever so that this hell can continue. This will be gone. This is the battlefield I was referring to. Knowing the truth is all a part of setting a spirit free. All a part.